a friend of mine. His name is Dan, and Dan helped me actually plant the church that I planted in September of 1988. Dan always told this story. Dan said there was this plane that took off from a particular airport, and since we were in the Orange County area, it took off over the San Bernardino Mountains, and the plane had 4 people on it: a pilot, a Boy Scout, a minister, and the world's smartest man. And Dan said that somewhere over the San Bernardino Mountains, as a result of terrible thunderstorms, the plane began encountering severe trouble. And the pilot looked back at the other 3 passengers and said, "Folks, we're going down. Here's the problem. There's 4 of us, and we only have 3 parachutes." And right at that moment, the pilot grabbed one of them and said, "I have a family. My family needs me." And he jumped out of the plane. Well, right away, the world's smartest man said, "I'm the world's smartest man. The world needs me. It can't live without me." So right then and there, he grabbed one, jumped out of the plane. Now, all that was left was a minister and the Boy Scout. And the minister said, hey, son, I know the Lord. I know where I'm going when I die. Here, you have the last parachute. And Dan, who was telling the story, told us that the Boy Scout then looked at the minister and said, "Hey, cool it, Reverend. The world's smartest man just jumped out of the plane with my backpack." Now, here's the problem as I see it. A lot of us pastors think we're the world's smartest people, and we think we're indispensable people. Now, I've been asked to discuss the topic of succession, and allow me to say it this way. When it comes to ministry, your smartness and success is not determined by how and what you start. Your smartness and success is determined by when and how you leave. How you start and what you start isn't nearly as important as when and how you leave. Now, if you've ever gone to a 12-step meeting, then you know that they will introduce themselves this way. They'll say, "Hi," they'll say their first name. So if it's like me, they would say, "Hi, I'm Tim." And then they would say, "I'm an alcoholic." And everyone says at that point, what? "Hi, Tim." So today, allow me to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Tim, and I am an interim pastor. To which you all say, "Hi, Tim." So all the pastors in the room right now, stand right now. All the pastors, that's you. All the pastors here, stand right now. Stand. So you all say with me, whatever your first name. Hi, say it. All right, and I am an interim pastor. Good, you can be seated. You can be seated. See, in a 12-step meeting, you say that because you're no longer in denial. Hey, pastor, once you're no longer in denial, the question that ought to motivate you, the question that every leader ought to obsess about is what I started with me, is what started with me going to end with me? Is what started with me going to end with me? And to the answer to that question, it must be a resounding no. What started with you should never end with you. Not when it comes to the church, the bride of Jesus Christ. Hey, the world's smartest pastor, you think you're the world's smartest pastor? I'm just telling you right now, the mission is way bigger than you. And your goal should be to help the church that you've been a part of thrive and grow long after you're gone. Come on, friends. There's all kinds of biblical precedent for succession and transition in intentional kinds of leadership. Moses trained Joshua for 40 years. David selected his son Solomon to succeed him. Elijah mentored Elisha. The Levitical priesthood, by the time you were 55, you tapped out, okay? John the Baptist prepared the way for Jesus. Paul appointed Timothy as his understudy. Intentional planning for succession is a biblical thing. Preparing a successor and preparing a congregation to make smooth transition of leadership, it's a biblical principle. Effective succession is so vital. And pastors, church leaders, allow me to say this. Ultimately, there is no success without succession. In fact, would you all say that with me? All of you here today say that. There is no success without succession. No matter how smart you think you are as a church leader, no matter how smart you think you are as a pastor, your leadership isn't really that effective if things go downhill, collapse, or become miserable when you leave. And in my case, I am so grateful for the job that Andrew Brownback, he's my successor at the Crossing Church in Costa Mesa, California. That church is now stronger under his leadership. I planted a church in the city of Costa Mesa, California in September of 1988. And we had the privilege of seeing the church grow. And then 5 years ago, on that church's 30th birthday, in the fall of 2018, I intentionally and systematically handed off the church to the next generation. Andrew was 35 years old at the time of the transition. And that church, under Andrew's leadership, COVID notwithstanding, is experiencing significant growth. My wife and I, we continue to attend the church. We have no responsibilities whatsoever. We serve as any attendee of a local church should. We continue to give to that church significantly. And let me tell you something. I couldn't be happier. Leaders, I'm just telling you, I'm pleading with you. Don't let what started with you end with you. So why is succession going so poorly for so many denominations and so many churches? Here's what I'm seeing and hearing. It's because the senior or lead pastor stays too long. For too many pastors today, they are staying too long. Come on. If you're honest with yourself, your passion has faded. Your zeal is diminished. There are very few fresh ideas these days, if you even have any. But you just keep on hanging on. And here's the kicker. Most of the time, everyone, the board, the congregation, the staff, can see you need to leave, but you don't see it. You're the one in denial. That's why I started the way I did. You've forgotten that I am an interim pastor. If you don't see it and know it, let me say this. Your denial is harming the mission. The church you lead isn't growing anymore. And pastors are great at inventing reasons as to why it's not. I've heard them all. It's not me. The culture's changed. The world's going to hell in a handbasket. Those millennials and Gen Zers, it's like they don't care. They're ruining the local church. Oh, people aren't coming because they're watching online. Things just aren't the same anymore. But here's the problem with all your reasons. They all ignore the facts that there's a church across town that's blowing up with young leadership and new approaches. And what's happening to you is the team that's around you, your volunteers and some of the volunteer staff, they're leaving one by one, or they're growing increasingly frustrated. You're no longer like a fresh helium-filled balloon soaring. No, you're fading. The truth about you is your passion is waning. And I'm going to tell you right now, great leaders are passionate leaders. And the flip side of this is a passionless leader is an ineffective leader. And don't you dare be that leader. And pastor, what happens when that is you, everyone's afraid to address the elephant in the room. No one has the courage to say to you, I don't know how to tell you this, but you stayed way past your expiration date. For the sake of the mission, will you move on? After all, pastor, you're not the mission. The mission is so much bigger than you. And I know I'm being direct, but as someone who has sat in that seat from what I'm seeing is many pastors are hanging on too long. The church isn't your personal kingdom, it's God's. And we are called to steward it appropriately. And why do many church leaders stay too long? There are many reasons, but let me tell you the two most prominent reasons. Too many pastors, number one, stay because they can't afford to leave. I've had dozens of conversations with successors and board members. You can read it now in book after book that's come out over the last 10 years. One of the main reasons why pastors stay 5, 10, 15 years too long, it's financial. And I'll tell you something, that's heartbreaking, both for the pastor and for the church. And sure, sometimes mismanagement of your personal finances is the issue for you as a pastor. Maybe you made enough, you just didn't save enough. But often, the financial crisis is rising at the end of your ministry life. And you know why? Because the church honestly didn't pay that well. And they didn't set you up for a future. Too few churches pay a living wage. And I have extreme empathy for that. However, come on. Does that mean you should hang on just to collect a freaking paycheck? Or to wait until your Social Security kicks in? Be smarter than that. Don't do that. Listen to me now, pastors and church leaders. A money issue is a money issue. A money issue does not need to become a succession issue. Treat the financial issue as a financial issue. If you as a pastor need more money for the future, then learn from somebody how to negotiate a settlement or create a payout or a retirement arrangement and move on. Or get your church to get you some financial counseling that will create some kind of alternate plan. And for those of you who are church board members here today, honor that leader. Honor that leader who has had a long tenure and contributed extensively to the mission over many years. But please don't let them overstay just because they can't afford groceries. What's the solution? What's the solution? Make the money issue about money. Don't make it about tenure. Solve the financial tension with a financial plan. And then get a new leader in place who will passionately plan for the future. Now, there's a second reason why pastors overstay. And that is many pastors stay because their identity is what you do instead of who you are. Pastors hang on far too long because, let's face it, our identity is wrapped up in what it is we do. And I'll just tell you, as somebody who's done it now for 30 years, there's something about our profession, pastoring, that consumes a person's identity. I mean, you think about it. It's where you do your social engagements. It's where you have your friendships. It's where you do your spiritual relationships. It's like an all-in activity. And a loss of identity is huge. And what happens is, us pastors, when we look to the future, it's not nearly as exciting as the present or the past has been. So we hang on. And besides, what else can we do? We've been in ministry for decades. But please listen to me, pastors. Regardless of your age, your identity is not in what you do. It's found in who you are, in Jesus Christ. The book of Romans tells us that. And here's the irony of it all. Pastors who hang on to their job too long, all because you're afraid of the future, but you'll have less of a future than if you let go. Let me say that again. Pastors who hang on to their job too long because, in essence, you're afraid of the future, you'll have less of a future than if you let go. Before my succession, because of the way I'm wired, I went out and I interviewed 18 different successors and asked, what would you say to your outgoing pastor? And you know what successors wanted to say to the person who they took over for, but they couldn't say it directly to them? Let me paraphrase it. They would say to the outgoing person, Get lost and get a life. Because when your identity is wrapped up in what you do, it explains why so many successors told me many outgoing pastors, even after they supposedly retired, they meddled and interfered. It's like they couldn't let go of the steering wheel. So they make life miserable, even impossible for their successor. Hey, God doesn't love you for what you do. He loves you for who you are. What you do isn't who you are. And I'm just going to say it for the board in here today. This is where the board should step in, have an honest conversation with that particular leader, talk about all the options that he or she faces for the future. By making the financial conversation a financial one and creating clear boundaries around the former pastor's role, church leadership teams can help leaders who need to go. And do it well, and do it with dignity. And when that happens, everyone wins. Now, okay, as you sit here today, if you're that pastor or you're that leader, what do you do? If you're the senior leader who's sensing, and by the way, I think if you're 60, 61, 62, 63, you should already have a plan. And you're sensing that maybe you've stayed too long. What do? Well, you want to know what will make you the smartest person in the world? Initiate the conversation. Rather than waiting until you've exhausted all of your energy, go out while you're on top. Don't wait for the situation where you must be asked to leave. Be the one who leads the succession conversation. Pray about your future, sure, but also display courage by tapping on your board chair or an executive pastor and their shoulder and say, I think the time has come for us to have a conversation about me stepping aside. I'm not sure I can afford to, and I'm not sure I'm all excited about it, but I think it's time. Trust me, if it's not time, they'll let you know it's not time. But more often than not, let me tell you what will happen. They will be relieved that you brought up the dialogue. If it goes well, everybody wins. And what if it doesn't? Well, then you got to ask yourself this, Pastor. Would I rather face God and tell him, God, I tried to do the right thing? Or would you rather face God and tell him you were afraid and so you did the easy thing? Meaning you hung on way too long. And pastors, can I say something? God has a habit of catching us when we jump. And believe me when I say it, ultimately, your future belongs to him anyway. So run toward it with joy and enthusiasm. And let me just say this, because I'd be less than human to say this without honesty. Is it scary? Sure. It is. But let me tell you something. Every faith step is scary. That's what makes it a faith step, right? You've been preaching on it for years. Now live it. And what if you're the board? I know some of you are thinking, well, we could just take the video of this talk and then send it to our pastor. Hey, board member, listen to me right now. None of us wants to be the person who gets tapped on the shoulder one day. But let me tell you, especially in the church, the mission is too important to let a passionless or ineffective leader lead. So start with prayer. Discuss the topic discreetly with you as a board and see if they all agree. And make those short, helpful, and honoring conversations. And don't you dare get toxic. Talk about creating a financial plan. And please, let that leader leave with dignity. Move them into the future by honoring their past. Address the issue, but look for the image of God inside your leader, and then treat him or her with respect and honor. But by the way, the literature all says it's important to tackle this issue earlier rather than later. I started to think about it and brought it up initially with our board when I was 53 years of age. I did not want to be the old guy who overstayed, and I said to our board, I want to be out by the time I'm 60. I said 5 years ago I handed it off. I did hand it off when I was 60, so you do the math of what age I am today. Imagine a day when every leader thinks about succession long before it's needed. So, Pastor, begin today with the end in mind. And remember, there is no success without succession. So start working on your succession now. And for every pastor who senses that maybe you've overstayed your leadership, you just got to know that doing the right thing is never the easy thing. But can I just tell you today, with somebody who's done it, do the right thing. I can't imagine how much stronger the church you now lead will be a decade from now if you get this succession thing right. So friends, let's get it right. Why? Because your smartness is not determined by how and what you start. Your smartness is determined by when and how you leave. Thank you very much.